The moment Violet Parker's skirt hem brushed against the cooking fire, she knew her life was about to change forever, though not in any way she could have imagined on that scorching August afternoon in 1878. She had been standing too close to the outdoor fire pit behind the boarding house where she worked in Deadwood, South Dakota, trying to stir the massive pot of stew that would feed 20 hungry miners that evening. The wind had picked up suddenly, as it often did in the Black Hills, and before she could step back, the flames licked up the cotton fabric of her pale blue dress. The fire spread faster than thought, climbing toward her waist with hungry orange fingers. Violet screamed, dropping the wooden spoon into the dirt. Panic seized her throat as the heat intensified against her legs. She tried to pat the flames down with her bare hands, but that only made things worse. The fire seemed alive, determined to consume her. Her mind went blank with terror as smoke filled her nostrils, and the crackling sound grew louder in her ears. Then strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and she felt herself being thrown to the ground. A heavy weight pressed down on her, rolling her body across the packed earth. She could hear a man's voice, low and urgent, saying words she could not quite make out through her panic. The flames went out as quickly as they had started, smothered by the man's body and the dirt. When the rolling stopped, Violet lay on her back, gasping for air, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. A shadow fell across her face as someone leaned over her. Through her blurred vision, she saw a man with dark hair and intense eyes the color of storm clouds. His hands were on her shoulders, steadying her. "You're safe. You're safe," he whispered, his voice rough but somehow gentle at the same time. He repeated it like a prayer, and something in those words made the panic begin to recede. "You're safe." Violet blinked up at him, trying to catch her breath. She could feel the burned fabric of her dress against her legs, but miraculously, the pain was not as bad as she had feared. The fire had not reached her skin in most places, thanks to this stranger's quick action. "Can you breathe?" the man asked, his face close to hers. "Are you hurt?" She managed to nod, then shake her head, then felt foolish for not knowing which question she was answering. I think I'm all right," she finally managed to say, her voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. The man sat back on his heels, giving her space. Now she could see him more clearly. He was young, probably not much older than her own 22 years, with a lean, strong build that spoke of hard work and long days in the saddle. He wore dusty trail clothes and a hat that had fallen off during the rescue, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. His face was angular and handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. "Let me help you up," he said, extending his hand. "We should get you inside and check for burns." Violet took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers as he pulled her gently to her feet. She swayed slightly, still dizzy from shock, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Thank you," she said, finally finding her voice properly. "You saved my life. I don't even know your name." "Pierce Jackson," he said, a slight smile touching his lips for the first time. "I just rode into town about 5 minutes ago. Hell of a welcome." Despite everything, Violet felt herself smile back. "I'm Violet Parker, and I'm terribly sorry for the dramatic introduction. I promise Deadwood is usually more hospitable to newcomers." A woman's voice called out from the back door of the boarding house. "Violet, good Lord, child, what happened?" Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, came hurrying across the yard, her face pale with concern. "My dress caught fire," Violet explained, looking down at the charred remains of her hem. The damage was worse than she had thought. The entire bottom portion of her skirt was black and crumbling, and she could see patches of red skin on her ankles where the flames had touched her. "Mr. Jackson here saved me." Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, turned to Pierce. "Bless you, young man." "Bless you. Come inside, both of you. Violet, we need to treat those burns immediately. Mr. Jackson, you'll stay for supper, I insist. It's the least we can do." Pierce started to protest, but Mrs. Henderson was already ushering them both toward the door. "No arguments, I won't hear of it. You saved this girl's life, and you'll be rewarded with a hot meal and a clean bed for the night." Inside, the boarding house was cool and dim after the bright sunshine outside. Violet was taken to her small room on the second floor, where Mrs. Henderson and another boarder, an older woman named Mrs. Kimball who had some nursing experience, examined her burns. They were painful but not severe, mostly first-degree burns that would heal with proper care. Mrs. Kimball applied a salve made from yarrow and comfrey, then wrapped Violet's ankles and lower legs in clean cotton bandages. "You were incredibly lucky," Mrs. Kimball said as she worked. "Another few seconds and this could have been much worse. That young man has quick reflexes." Violet nodded, wincing slightly as the salve touched a particularly tender spot. "I know. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't been there." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Mrs. Henderson said, laying out a fresh dress for Violet to change into. "That man arriving at exactly the right moment. That's divine providence, that is." After Violet had changed and composed herself, she made her way carefully down the stairs to the dining room. Her legs hurt with each step, but the pain was manageable. She found Pierce sitting at the long wooden table, looking somewhat uncomfortable among the other boarders who had already gathered for the evening meal. When he saw her, he stood immediately, a look of relief crossing his face. "Miss Parker, how are you feeling?" he asked. "Sore, but grateful," she replied, taking a seat across from him. "The burns aren't too bad, thanks to you." The other boarders were all staring at Pierce with curiosity and gratitude. News of the rescue had spread quickly through the house, as news always did in close quarters. An older miner named Tom Davies raised his tin cup in a toast. "To young Jackson here," he said loudly. "A true hero. Welcome to Deadwood, son." The others echoed the sentiment, and Pierce looked embarrassed by the attention. "I just did what anyone would do," he said quietly. "Nonsense, Mrs. Henderson said, bringing out the stew that Violet had been making before the accident. Someone else had finished cooking it. "Not everyone has the presence of mind to act so quickly. You're a hero, Mr. Jackson, whether you like it or not." As the meal progressed, the conversation turned to the usual topics. The boarders discussed the latest news from the gold mines, the rumor of a new rail line that might come through the territory, and the ongoing tensions with some of the mining companies. Violet found herself watching Pierce more than participating in the conversation. He ate quietly, answering questions when asked, but not volunteering much about himself. After dinner, as the other boarders dispersed to their rooms or to the saloons in town, Violet caught Pierce as he was about to head upstairs. "Mr. Jackson," she said, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but what brings you to Deadwood?" He turned to her, and in the lamplight, his gray eyes seemed to soften. "Work, mostly. I've been cowboying down in Wyoming, but the ranch I was working for had to let some hands go. Heard there might be opportunities up here, maybe with freight companies or cattle drives coming through." "Are you a good cowboy?" Violet asked, then felt herself blush. "I mean, that's a foolish question. I just meant, I'm good enough to stay employed usually," Pierce said with a slight smile. "Been doing it since I was 15. It's all I really know." 7 years then, Violet calculated. "You must have seen a lot of the territory." More than I ever expected to when I was a kid in Missouri, he admitted. My parents died of fever when I was young. I headed west with nothing but a horse and the clothes on my back. Been working ever since. Something in his voice when he mentioned his parents made Violet's heart ache. I'm sorry about your family, she said softly. It was a long time ago, Pierce said, but she could see it still hurt him. What about you? How did you end up in Deadwood? My father was a miner, Violet explained. He brought us out here from Pennsylvania 3 years ago, chasing gold like everyone else. He died in a mine collapse last year. My mother passed when I was 12, so it's just been me since then. Mrs. Henderson took me in and gave me work. I'm sorry, Pierce said, and she could tell he meant it. They stood in the dim hallway for a moment, two young people who had both lost so much, connected now by a moment of fire and rescue. Violet felt a strange pull toward this stranger, something she could not quite name. Well, she said finally, I should let you rest. You must be tired from traveling. Miss Parker, Pierce said as she turned to go, would it be all right if I called on you tomorrow? I'd like to make sure you're healing properly. Violet felt her heart skip. I'd like that very much, Mr. Jackson. That night, Violet lay in her small bed, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Her legs throbbed dully beneath the bandages, but that was not what kept her awake. She kept seeing Pierce's face above hers, hearing his voice saying, "You're safe. You're safe." She kept feeling the strength of his arms as he pulled her to safety, the gentleness of his hands as he helped her up. She barely knew this man, and yet something had shifted in her world. In a single moment of danger and rescue, a connection had been forged that felt deeper than it should. Violet had never put much stock in the romantic notions she read about in the dime novels that sometimes made their way to Deadwood. She had always been practical, focused on survival and work. But now, lying in the darkness, she found herself thinking about storm-gray eyes and a rough voice whispering reassurance. The next morning, Violet woke to find her burns had stiffened overnight. Mrs. Henderson insisted she stay off her feet as much as possible. So Violet spent the morning in a chair by the front window, mending linens and watching the street outside. Deadwood was busy as always, with freight wagons rumbling past, miners heading to and from the diggings, and townsfolk going about their business. Pierce appeared around mid-morning, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. Violet's pulse quickened when she saw him walking up to the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson, who missed nothing, gave Violet a knowing smile before going to answer the door. Mr. Jackson, good morning, Mrs. Henderson said warmly. Come in, come in. Violet's in the front room. Pierce entered, removing his hat. Good morning, Miss Parker. How are you feeling today? Better, thank you, Violet said, setting aside her mending. Please sit down. He took a seat near her, and Mrs. Henderson conveniently found a reason to busy herself in another room. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and Violet felt suddenly shy. I wanted to thank you again properly, she said. I was in such shock yesterday that I don't think I expressed how grateful I am. You risked yourself to save me. The risk was minimal, Pierce said. Fire's dangerous, but I've dealt with it before. Range fires, campfires getting out of control. You learn to move fast. Still, Violet insisted. You could have been hurt. Most people would have frozen or panicked. You didn't. Pierce looked down at his hands. I lost someone to a fire once, he said quietly. A good friend when I was 17. I was too far away to help him. I swore after that I'd never stand by and watch again. Violet felt tears prick her eyes. I'm so sorry. Like I said, it was years ago. Pierce looked up at her, his expression unreadable. But when I saw you on fire yesterday, I just moved, didn't think about it. I'm very glad you did, Violet said softly. They talked for over an hour. the conversation flowing more easily than Violet would have expected with someone she had just met. Pierce told her about his work on various ranches, about sleeping under the stars and long cattle drives, about the beauty of the open plains and the harsh realities of cowboy life. Violet told him about Pennsylvania, about the journey west with her father, about learning to survive in a rough mining town as a young woman on her own. "It can't be easy," Pierce observed. "A woman alone in a place like this." "Mrs. Henderson looks out for me," Violet said. "And most of the miners are decent enough, once they understand I'm not available for the kind of company some of them are looking for. I keep my head down and do my work." "You shouldn't have to just survive," Pierce said. "You should be able to live." Something in the way he said it made Violet's breath catch. "What about you?" she asked. "Is that what you do, just survive?" Pierce was quiet for a moment. "I suppose it is," he admitted. "Never really thought about it differently, never had a reason to." Before Violet could respond, Mrs. Henderson called from the kitchen. "Violet, dear, could you come help me for a moment?" Violet excused herself and made her way carefully to the kitchen, where Mrs. Henderson was rolling out dough for biscuits. The older woman looked at her with twinkling eyes. "That's a good young man out there," she said without preamble. "Mrs. Henderson," Violet said, feeling her cheeks warm, "we've only just met." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Mrs. Henderson said knowingly. "I knew Mr. Henderson was the one for me within an hour of meeting him. Married 42 years before the Lord took him home. You know it when you know it." "I don't know anything yet," Violet protested. But even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. Over the next week, Pierce became a regular visitor to the boarding house. He had found work with a freight company that hauled supplies between Deadwood and the surrounding settlements, so he was often in town. Whenever he was not working, he came to see Violet. They would sit on the front porch in the evening, talking while the sun set over the Black Hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Violet's burns healed quickly, and soon she was back to her regular duties. Pierce would often arrive just as she was finishing her work, and they would walk through the town together, past the saloons and gambling halls, the assay offices and general stores. Deadwood was a rough place, built hastily and chaotically during the gold rush, but Violet had grown to love it in her own way. Seeing it through Pierce's eyes made it feel new again. "You ever think about leaving?" Pierce asked her one evening as they stood on the edge of town, looking out at the hills. "Sometimes," Violet admitted. "But where would I go? This is home now, as rough as it is. What about you?" "I've never had a home," Pierce said. "Not since I was a kid. Just places I work for a while before moving on." "That sounds lonely," Violet said quietly. Pierce looked at her, and in the fading light his expression was intense. "It has been, until now." Violet's heart began to race. They had been dancing around their feelings for over a week now, the attraction growing stronger each day, but neither had spoken it aloud. Now, standing in the twilight, the words seemed to hang in the air between them. "Pierce," she said softly, using his first name for the first time. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Violet, I know we haven't known each other long, but I need you to know that meeting you has changed something for me. When I pulled you from that fire, I felt like I was saving more than just your life. I felt like I was saving something for myself too." "What do you mean?" she asked, though her heart already understood. "I mean that for the first time in 7 years, I feel like I have a reason to stay in one place," Pierce said. "You make me want to build something instead of just wandering." "I'm falling in love with you, Violet. I think I started falling the moment I saw you." Tears welled in Violet's eyes. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I've been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. It seemed impossible that something so real could happen so fast." "May I kiss you?" Pierce asked, stepping closer. In answer, Violet tilted her face up to his. His lips met hers gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. It was her first real kiss, and she felt it through her entire body, a warmth that had nothing to do with fire and everything to do with connection, with recognition, with love. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer you," he said. "Just hard work and whatever wages I can earn. But if you'll have me, I swear I'll spend every day trying to give you the life you deserve." "I don't need much," Violet said, her hands on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "I just need you." They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. When they finally walked back to the boarding house, everything felt different. The world looked brighter, more full of possibility. Mrs. Henderson took one look at their faces when they came in and smiled widely. "About time," was all she said. The courtship that followed was brief by some standards, but it felt right to both of them. Pierce was attentive and gentle, always respectful of Violet's reputation. He would bring her wildflowers picked from the hills, small tokens that meant more to her than gold. They would sit on the porch and make plans for the future, talking about what kind of life they wanted to build together. Pierce was determined to save enough money for a small house, someplace they could call their own. He worked extra hours with the freight company, taking on the most difficult and dangerous routes because they paid better. Violet continued her work at the boarding house, setting aside every penny she could spare. One evening in early October, about 2 months after they had met, Pierce arrived at the boarding house looking excited. He found Violet in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Henderson prepare supper, and asked if he could speak with her outside. "I've been offered a job," he said once they were alone on the porch. "A good one. There's a ranch about 10 miles north of town that's expanding their operation. They need someone to manage their cattle and train new hands. It's steady work, good pay, and it comes with a small house on the property." Violet's eyes widened. "Pierce, that's wonderful. The thing is," he continued, reaching for her hands, "the house is meant for a family man. The owner, Mr. Jennings, said he prefers to hire married men because they're more stable, more likely to stay. I told him I was planning to get married soon." Violet's breath caught. "Are you?" Pierce got down on one knee right there on the porch, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "Violet Parker, I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Violet's face as she nodded. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course I will." Pierce stood and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. From inside the house, they heard Mrs. Henderson let out a whoop of joy. Apparently, she had been listening at the door. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Deadwood. Mrs. Henderson and the boarding house residents attended, along with some of Pierce's co-workers from the freight company. Mr. Jennings, Pierce's new employer, came as well, a gruff but kind-hearted rancher in his 60s who seemed pleased with his new hired hand's choice of bride. Violet wore a new dress that Mrs. Henderson and the other women had helped her sew, a simple but beautiful gown of pale yellow cotton with lace at the collar. Pierce wore his best clothes, his dark hair slicked back, looking more nervous than Violet had ever seen him. When the pastor asked him to repeat his vows, his voice was strong and clear, filled with emotion. "I, Pierce Jackson, take you, Violet Parker, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. You are my home, my heart, and my future." Violet spoke her own vows through happy tears, and when they were pronounced husband and wife, Pierce kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance began crying as well. The celebration afterward at the boarding house was lively, with music and dancing and far too much food. As Violet danced with her new husband, she thought about the fire that had nearly killed her, the moment that had brought Pierce into her life. What had seemed like a disaster had become the beginning of everything she had ever wanted. Late that night, Pierce drove them to their new home in a wagon borrowed from Mr. Jennings. The small house sat on a rise overlooking the ranch's pastures, a simple wooden structure with 2 rooms and a covered porch. It was not grand, but to Violet, it was perfect. Pierce carried her over the threshold, and they stood together in the middle of their new home, holding each other close. "Are you happy?" Pierce asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Violet replied honestly. "You saved my life, Pierce, and then you gave me a reason to live it." "You did the same for me," he said, kissing her forehead. "I was just drifting before I met you. Now I have purpose. I have a home, I have everything." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous but eager. Pierce was gentle with Violet, patient and loving, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay together in their bed, Violet's head on Pierce's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Tell me about your dreams," Violet said softly. "What do you want from this life we're building?" Pierce was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "I want to make this ranch successful," he said. "I want to prove to Mr. Jennings that he was right to trust me. I want to save enough money that we never have to worry about where our next meal is coming from. But mostly, I want to fill this house with children and laughter. I want to grow old with you, watching our grandchildren play in these same hills. I want to build something that lasts." "That sounds perfect," Violet whispered. "I want all of that too." Life on the ranch was hard work, but both Pierce and Violet threw themselves into it with determination. Pierce proved to be an excellent manager, with a natural talent for handling cattle and training the younger cowboys. He was firm but fair, and the men respected him. Mr. Jennings was impressed with how quickly Pierce improved the operation. Violet transformed their simple house into a real home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted a vegetable garden, and learned to cook the hearty meals that Pierce and the ranch hands needed. She also took on work helping with the ranch accounts, her neat handwriting and head for numbers making her invaluable to Mr. Jennings. In December, during the first real snowstorm of winter, Violet realized she was pregnant. She waited until Christmas morning to tell Pierce, wrapping up a pair of tiny knitted booties that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make. When Pierce opened the small package and saw what was inside, his face went through several expressions before landing on pure joy. "Violet, are you saying what I think you're saying?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. "We're going to have a baby. In late summer, I think." Pierce pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you so much. You've given me everything." The pregnancy was not easy. Violet suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, barely able to keep food down. Pierce was attentive and worried, hovering over her whenever he was not working. As winter turned to spring, the sickness eased, but Violet grew increasingly large and uncomfortable. She continued to work as much as she could, determined not to be idle, but by July she was forced to admit she needed to rest more. On a hot August afternoon, almost exactly a year after the fire that had brought them together, Violet went into labor. Pierce rode into town to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Henderson, then paced outside the house like a caged animal while the women attended to his wife. The labor was long and difficult. Through the walls, Pierce could hear Violet crying out in pain, and each sound cut through him like a knife. He had saved her from fire, but he could not save her from this. All he could do was wait and pray. Finally, just as the sun was setting, he heard a different sound. A baby's cry, loud and strong. Pierce stood frozen, hardly daring to hope. Then the door opened and Mrs. Henderson appeared, smiling broadly. "You have a son, Pierce," she said. "A beautiful, healthy boy, and Violet is tired but well." Pierce rushed past her into the bedroom. Violet lay in their bed, pale and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. Pierce approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. "Come meet your son," Violet said softly. Pierce sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. He had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. As Pierce watched, the baby opened his eyes, revealing a deep blue that would probably change color in time. Something in Pierce's chest cracked open, a well of love so deep he had not known it existed. "He's perfect," Pierce whispered. "You're perfect. Thank you, Violet. Thank you for him, for this, for everything." They named him James, after Pierce's father. Little James proved to be a strong baby with healthy lungs and a good appetite. Pierce was a devoted father from the start, taking every opportunity to hold his son, to rock him when he cried, to simply watch him sleep. Violet would often find them together on the porch in the evenings. Pierce talking softly to the baby about the ranch, about the cattle, about all the things they would do together when James was older. The years that followed were full and rich. Pierce's skill and hard work paid off, and after 3 years, Mr. Jennings offered to sell him a portion of the ranch and make him a full partner. It took every penny they had saved and a loan from the bank, but Pierce and Violet became landowners, with their own cattle and their own stake in the future. James grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere. When he was 3, he got a baby sister, whom they named Rose. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas. The little house became increasingly crowded, so Pierce and some of the ranch hands built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Violet often thought about that day when her dress caught fire, about how one moment of danger had led to everything she now held dear. She would watch Pierce teaching James to rope a fence post or see him dancing with little Rose in the kitchen, and her heart would overflow with gratitude. Pierce seemed to have similar thoughts. On their 5th wedding anniversary, he took Violet up to the rise behind their house where they could see the whole ranch spread out below them. The sun was setting, painting everything in golden light. "You remember what I said to you that first day?" Pierce asked, holding her hand. "You said I was safe," Violet replied, leaning against his shoulder. "You are," Pierce said. "You always will be, but I need you to know that you did the same for me. Before I met you, I was just existing, just moving from place to place with no real purpose. You gave me a reason to put down roots. You gave me a home, a family, a life worth living. You saved me just as much as I saved you." Violet turned to look at her husband, seeing the lines that hard work and sun had etched around his eyes, the gray starting to appear in his dark hair. He was no longer the young cowboy who had pulled her from the fire, and she was no longer the frightened girl in the burned dress. They had both changed, grown, built something together. "We saved each other," she said simply, "and we built this together." Their children grew strong and healthy on the ranch. James developed his father's way with horses and cattle, showing even as a young boy that he would be a natural rancher. Rose was spirited and brave, insisting on learning to ride and rope just like her brothers. Thomas was gentler, more interested in books and numbers, and Violet suspected he might follow a different path when he grew up. When James was 10, Rose 8, and Thomas 6, Violet found herself pregnant again. This time, at 33, the pregnancy was harder than the others. She was tired all the time and had to rest frequently. Pierce was worried, remembering how difficult James's birth had been, but Violet assured him everything would be fine. The baby, another son they named David, arrived safely in the spring. He was smaller than the others had been, but healthy and strong. With 4 children, the house was chaotic and loud, full of laughter and arguments and all the messy reality of family life. Pierce and Violet were often exhausted, but they were happy. Mr. Jennings, who had become like a father to both of them, passed away when James was 12. To everyone's surprise, he left his portion of the ranch to Pierce in his will. The old rancher had no children of his own, and he had come to think of Pierce as a son. Suddenly, Pierce and Violet found themselves the owners of one of the largest and most successful ranches in the Dakota Territory. The responsibility was enormous, but Pierce rose to meet it. He expanded the operation carefully, hiring good men and treating them fairly. He was known throughout the territory as an honest rancher who kept his word and paid his debts. Violet managed the household and the accounts, her careful bookkeeping helping them weather the lean years when cattle prices dropped or drought affected the grazing. They faced challenges, of course. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to cold and hunger. There were dry summers when the water ran low and the grass turned brown. There were accidents and illnesses, close calls and heartbreaks. But through it all, Pierce and Violet faced everything together. Their love the foundation that kept them strong. On their 15th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. James was now a strapping young man of 16, already taking on more responsibility around the ranch. Rose at 14 was turning into a beautiful young woman, though she still preferred riding and roping to domestic pursuits. Thomas at 12 had his nose constantly in books, dreaming of perhaps becoming a teacher or a lawyer. And little David at 5 was the baby of the family, spoiled by everyone but developing his own fierce independence. As Violet looked around the table at her family, at the children they had raised and the life they had built, she felt overwhelmed with emotion. Pierce caught her eye and smiled, that same smile that had first captured her heart all those years ago. After dinner, they walked together to their favorite spot on the rise, watching the sunset as they had done so many times before. Pierce put his arm around her waist and Violet leaned into him, comfortable with the familiar weight of him beside her. "Happy anniversary," Pierce said softly. "Happy anniversary," Violet replied. "Can you believe it's been 15 years? Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Pierce said. "Sometimes it feels like forever, in the best way." "I know what you mean," Violet said. "I can hardly remember what life was like before all of this." "You were standing too close to that fire," Pierce said with a slight smile, "stirring stew for the boarders." "And you rode into town at exactly the right moment," Violet continued. "Like fate." "I don't know if I believe in fate," Pierce said, "but I believe we were lucky. I believe we found each other when we both needed it most, and I believe we've built something real and lasting." "We have," Violet agreed. "Our children, this ranch, this life. It's more than I ever dreamed of when I was a girl." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. In the distance, they could hear their children playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "You ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't been there that day?" Pierce asked suddenly. Violet shuddered slightly. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I try not to. I'd rather think about what did happen, about how you saved me and then gave me this beautiful life." "We gave each other this life," Pierce corrected gently. "You've saved me just as many times as I've saved you." Maybe not from fire, but from loneliness, from purposelessness, from a life without meaning. Violet turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "I love you, Pierce Jackson. I love you just as much now as I did the day we married. More even." "I love you too, Violet," Pierce said, pulling her close. "Always and forever." They kissed as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over their courtship, their wedding, the births of their children, and all the years of their life together. It was a kiss that held 15 years of love, of partnership, of shared dreams and weathered storms. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. James grew up and married a sweet girl from town named Margaret. They built a house on the other side of the ranch and started their own family, giving Pierce and Violet their first grandchild, a little girl named Emma, when James was 21. Rose surprised everyone by falling in love with a schoolteacher who came to Deadwood, a gentle man named Henry who respected her independent spirit. They married and moved to Cheyenne, where Henry had been offered a position at a larger school. Rose wrote frequently, and she and Henry visited whenever they could. Thomas did indeed pursue education, eventually attending college in the East and becoming a lawyer. He returned to Dakota Territory to practice, determined to help settlers and ranchers navigate the increasingly complex laws governing land and water rights. He set up his practice in Deadwood and married a judge's daughter named Catherine. David, the youngest, proved to have his father's gift with cattle and horses. He had no desire to leave the ranch, and Pierce began training him from an early age to take over the operation someday. Pierce and Violet settled into the comfortable rhythm of middle age, then older age. Their hair turned gray, their faces weathered by years of sun and wind. Pierce's hands became gnarled from decades of hard work, and Violet's back sometimes ached from all the years of cooking and cleaning and caring for her family. But they were healthy and happy, surrounded by children and grandchildren. On their 30th anniversary, the family threw them a huge celebration. Children and grandchildren came from all over, filling the ranch house to bursting. There was music and dancing and so much food that even the ranch hands could not eat it all. As the party wound down and the younger children were put to bed, Pierce and Violet found themselves once again on their favorite rise, looking out over the land they had built their life on. They moved more slowly now, Pierce with a slight limp from an old injury and Violet leaning on his arm, but they still made the climb to their special spot. 30 years, Violet marveled. "How did we get so old?" Pierce laughed. "Speak for yourself. I'm still young at heart." "You're 52 years old and your back hurts every morning," Violet teased. "Only when it's going to rain," Pierce protested, but he was smiling. "Besides, you're 53. We're in this together." "We are," Violet agreed, looking out at the ranch. "We've built something incredible, haven't we? 4 children, 8 grandchildren so far, this ranch that's known throughout the territory. All from a moment when my dress caught fire. All from a moment when I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time," Pierce corrected. "And smart enough to know a good thing when I saw it." Violet leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me that day, when you pulled me from the fire?" You're safe, Pierce quoted softly. I remember everything about that day." "I felt safe," Violet said. "Even though I was terrified, even though I was in pain when you said those words, I believed them, and I've felt safe ever since. Every day of our life together, you've made me feel safe and loved and cherished." Pierce turned to look at his wife, seeing past the gray hair and the wrinkles to the beautiful young woman he had fallen in love with 30 years ago. She was still there in her eyes, in her smile, in the way she looked at him. "You are safe," he said again, just as he had all those years ago. "You always will be," I'll always protect you, always love you for as long as I have breath in my body." "I know," Violet said, "and I'll do the same for you." They stood together watching the sunset, two people who had found each other in a moment of fire and danger and had built a lifetime of love from that single moment. The sky turned from gold to crimson to purple, and still they stood, unwilling to break the spell of the moment. Finally, as the first stars appeared, they made their way slowly back down to the house. Inside, they could hear their family, the grandchildren laughing, their own children talking and reminiscing. The house was full of life and love, exactly as they had always dreamed it would be. That night, lying in bed together as they had done for 30 years, Pierce reached for Violet's hand in the darkness. She squeezed his fingers and he squeezed back, a wordless communication that meant everything. "Thank you," Pierce whispered. "For what?" Violet asked. "For saying yes. For taking a chance on a rootless cowboy with nothing to offer but hard work and love. For giving me a family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning. For 30 years of happiness." Violet turned on her side to face him. "Thank you for saving me," she said. "Not just from the fire, but from a life lived halfway. Thank you for showing me what love really means. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." They fell asleep holding hands as they had done countless times before, secure in the love they shared and the life they had created together. The years continued to flow like water. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren. Pierce and Violet grew older, their movements slower, their memories sometimes fuzzy on recent events, but crystal clear on the important moments of their shared past. They spent more time sitting on the porch, watching the ranch continue under James and David's management, enjoying the parade of family members who came to visit. Pierce's health began to fail when he was 68. He had always been so strong, so vital that seeing him weaken was hard for everyone, especially Violet. But even as his body betrayed him, his mind stayed sharp, and his love for his family never wavered. On a warm summer evening, with Violet sitting beside his bed holding his hand, Pierce called all his children and grandchildren to gather around. His voice was weak but steady as he spoke to them. "I want you all to know how proud I am," he said, looking at each face in turn. "You've all grown into fine people and you're raising your children to be the same. This ranch, this family, this is my legacy. But more than that, the love we've shared, the way we've taken care of each other, that's what matters most." He turned to look at Violet, his eyes still holding that intensity that had captured her heart so many years ago. "And you," he said softly, "you've been my everything. My home, my heart, my reason for living. I've loved you from the moment I saw you, and I'll love you beyond this life." Tears streamed down Violet's face. "Don't talk like that," she said. "You're not going anywhere." "We both know better," Pierce said gently. "But it's all right. I've had a good life, a wonderful life. I have no regrets. Well, I wish I could have more time with you." "You've given me 53 years," Violet said through her tears. 53 years of love and happiness. I'm grateful for every single day." Pierce held on for 3 more days, surrounded by his family, never letting go of Violet's hand. On a quiet morning as the sun rose over the hills he had loved so much, he took his last breath with Violet's face the last thing he saw. The grief was crushing. Violet felt like half of herself had been torn away. For 53 years, Pierce had been her constant companion, her partner in everything. Now the bed was too big, the house too quiet, the world too empty without him. But she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love and support. They told stories about Pierce, about his wisdom and his kindness, his strength and his gentle heart. They reminded her that while he was gone, his legacy lived on in all of them. Violet lived for 7 more years after Pierce's death. They were quieter years, spent mostly on the porch of the house they had built together, watching the family they had created carry on their work. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about the day her dress caught fire and a young cowboy saved her life, about falling in love and building a life together. On a cool autumn evening, as the leaves turned gold on the trees they had planted together, Violet passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 82 years old, and she died with a smile on her face, her last thoughts of Pierce and the moment he had whispered, "You're safe, you're safe." They buried her next to Pierce on the rise overlooking the ranch, the place where they had shared so many sunsets and so many dreams. The whole family gathered for the funeral, 3 generations strong, all of them living proof of the love that had started with a fire and a rescue, and had grown into something enduring and beautiful. Years later, when the great-grandchildren asked about their great-grandparents, they were told the story. About how Violet's dress caught fire while she was cooking, about how a cowboy named Pierce had saved her and whispered those comforting words, about how they fell in love and built one of the finest ranches in Dakota Territory. The story became family legend, passed down through the generations. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Black Hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, people said you could sometimes feel their presence on that rise. 2 souls who had found each other in a moment of danger and had never let go, their love eternal as the land they had worked and the family they had raised. The ranch continued to thrive, passing from generation to generation, each one adding their own chapter to the story but never forgetting where it all began. In the family home, kept safe in a glass case, was a small piece of charred blue fabric, carefully preserved. It was all that remained of the dress that had caught fire that August day in 1878, the dress that had brought 2 people together and changed the course of countless lives. Beside it was a simple gold wedding band and a pair of work-worn gloves, Pierce's possessions kept as treasures. And on the wall hung a photograph, one of the few they had ever taken, showing a middle-aged couple standing together in front of their ranch house, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera but looking at each other. Even in the faded sepia tones, the love between them was unmistakable. The story of Pierce and Violet became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of love, to the idea that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best things, that sometimes being saved means more than just physical rescue, and that true love can grow from a single moment of connection into something that spans generations. Their great-great-grandchildren, living well into the 20th century, would sit on that same rise and look out over the ranch, now modernized with trucks and tractors, but still recognizable as the same land their ancestors had built. They would think about a young woman whose dress caught fire and a young cowboy who saved her, and they would feel connected to something larger than themselves, part of a love story that had become legend. The house where Pierce and Violet raised their family still stood, expanded and renovated over the years, but with the original 2 rooms preserved as they had been. The kitchen where Violet had cooked thousands of meals, the bedroom where their children had been born, the porch where they had sat together on countless evenings, all remained as monuments to their life together. And in Deadwood, in the cemetery behind the old church where they had been married, a newer generation would stop to read the inscription on a shared headstone. Pierce Jackson, 1856-1924. Violet Parker Jackson, 1856-1938. You're safe, together forever. The words meant little to strangers passing by, but to those who knew the story, They meant everything. They represented a promise kept, a love honored, a life well lived together. The legacy of that single moment when Pierce pulled Violet from the fire lived on in ways neither of them could have imagined. Their descendants became teachers and doctors, ranchers and lawyers, musicians and writers. They spread across the country, each carrying with them the values Pierce and Violet had instilled, the importance of family and hard work, of love and loyalty, of being there for each other in moments of danger and in moments of joy. And always, in every generation, when someone in the family was going through a difficult time, facing danger or uncertainty, someone would hold their hand and whisper, "You're safe, you're safe," passing on the comfort that had started more than a century ago with a cowboy and the woman he loved. The story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that love can strike like lightning, unexpected and transformative, and that when you find it, you hold on with everything you have. That sometimes the person who saves your life becomes your life, and that the best happy endings are not the ones that come easily, but the ones that are built day by day, through hard work and dedication, and an unwavering commitment to each other. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the ranch was still in the family, though now run as much as a historical site as a working ranch. Tourists would visit to see where the legendary love story had unfolded, to stand in the same kitchen where Violet had cooked, to sit on the same porch where Pierce and Violet had watched sunsets together. But for the family, it was more than history or legend. It was a reminder of where they came from, of the love that had started it all. And on summer evenings, when the family gathered for reunions, they would make the pilgrimage to the rise overlooking the ranch, and they would watch the sun set just as Pierce and Violet had done so many times before. The story of how Violet's dress caught fire and Pierce saved her, of how he whispered, "You're safe, you're safe," and how those simple words had been the beginning of everything, never grew old. Each time it was told, it carried the same weight, the same magic, the same power to move hearts and inspire hope. Because at its core, it was a story about more than just rescue or romance. It was about two people who found each other in a moment of crisis and chose to build something beautiful together. It was about how love can grow from a spark into a flame that warms multiple generations. It was about how the right person, arriving at exactly the right moment, can change everything. And it was a story with the happiest of endings, one where the hero and heroine lived long lives filled with love and family, where their children thrived and their legacy endured, where every day was a gift and every moment together was treasured. It was the kind of ending everyone hopes for but few achieve, made possible by a cowboy who did not hesitate when he saw someone in danger, and a woman who recognized in her rescuer something worth holding on to forever. The fire that nearly destroyed Violet became the forge in which their love was born, and from that love came generations of joy, of life, of hope. And in the end, that was the greatest miracle of all. Not that Pierce saved Violet from the flames, but that they saved each other from loneliness and gave the world a love story that would echo through time, inspiring everyone who heard it to believe in the transformative power of love and the possibility that sometimes, when we need it most, the right person appears and whispers the words we need to hear. "You're safe, you're safe."